have access to it later on, you can ask from me. Okay. Sometimes I don't feel like I don't like to hear myself, but then I think it's good for me to also hear from time to time, for me to understand how I am, how I sound to others. I know that I tend to speak a bit too fast. I tend to stutter also when it comes to certain words. So I've been reminded of that when I listen to myself in previous from previous lectures. So I think that's a good thing that I have to face. We have to face our fears. We have to admit our weaknesses, and then we'll try to improve from there. All right. I think all of us, it's part of our lifelong learning process. Okay. So today we move on away from history finally. So we are moving on to a new topic, which is on the Malaysian Constitution. Okay, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure I haven't actually uploaded this slide on Open Learning. My apologies for that. I should have done that before the class began. I'll do that as soon as we finish this class after this. Okay. Now, the Malaysian Constitution. So we are looking now at arguably the most important document for any country in the world today, especially in the context of modern nation states. Maybe if you're looking at from the point of view of countries in the past, during the times of Paleolithic era, or even before that, constitution may not necessarily be something which is very prominent. But even when it comes to some of the examples of ancient civilization in India, in Egypt, in China, they all had, in one way or the other, their own constitution. So what does that mean? Basically, is they have their own sets of laws. So why do we need law? For a country to run is for you to maintain some level of social order, because if there is no law, then the community will be in the constant state of anarchy and anomie, which means that lawlessness would prevail, so people would just simply do whatever they want, disregarding or whatever that is in terms of the health of the health or the effects that it may give to other people. So in any country, you need a set of law in order for you to govern. So the learning outcome for today is to identify the main features of the Malaysian Constitution, and then to analyze the provisions in the Malaysian Constitution on federalism, language, race, and religion. So we are not definitely going into the Constitution too deep, looking into every clauses and articles in it. That would be something that you would learn if you were to be a law student over here in Malaysia. But we are just here to understand some of the main provisions so that we know why this country exists the way it is and how it is run the way it is run. Okay, so that's basically the goal of covering this particular topic. Right, so just some brief information for introduction. A constitution is a collection of measures and guidelines for regulating the administration of a country, the basis for making the laws so that the ruling government can put the country in order fairly and efficiently. All right, please, anyone, if you had at any point, if you wish to ask me any questions, or if you want to put up a comment, please do so from time to time. I would love to try and answer that so that we can look into it. So we can also share a few informations other together, right? All right. What are the important matters of a constitution? It is basically for. I'm trying to adjust a bit because I can't see my own slide. Right. Okay. I read that the important matters when it comes to the constitution are issues as listed over here: citizenship, judiciary, finance, general elections, distribution of power, basic freedom, rights and responsibilities of the government. So on every of these topics or items that I mentioned over here, obviously there are a lot that you can talk about. We are going to cover some of them. For example, on citizenship, we will look into some of the important or main details about how you can become a citizen of this country. It's not as easy as it is maybe in the past compared to even countries like the US or in the UK. At the same time, there are opportunities, or there are ways that you can become a citizen of this country. It's just that it's made to be purposely to be a bit more difficult for you to get there. All the other things over here we'll cover also from later on. So when we talk about constitution, this is something that law students or any one of you who may have taken any law subjects in the past may recall. Constitution exists in both written and unwritten form. The written constitution is supported by various additional documents and other sources that strengthens the action of the constitution. But unwritten constitution would be those that are based on traditions, precedents, that may not necessarily be written in the constitution, but they are part of other documents that supports the constitution. This would refer to mostly to uh, past legal cases that are referred to in order to better interpret any aspect of the constitution that we have for the country. Now, when we talk about constitution, in fact, to be precise, also it's not something that is of reference or of necessity for a country only. I'm sure some of you, if not all of you, have been involved in clubs and societies in the past, during school, or even until now. Any club and society or any organization for that matter would have their own constitution as well. So the constitution would outline what are the things that you will get from being a member of this club, what are the privileges, what are the things that you cannot do, what are the boundaries of actions or in terms of also interaction or things that you can do outside or within the society. So all of that needs to be defined so that you know how to control members. So likewise, when it comes to a country, the citizens of the country are members of the organization, so to speak, members of the group. So as a result, that we need to know how we can govern them, how we should govern them to ensure there is some level of social order and systematic organization in the society. All right. So these are some important points to remember as far as the constitution in Malaysia is concerned, or in general also. The A mantra or a phrase that is often referred to in law studies is that the Constitution is supreme. So as stated in the last point over there, the federal Constitution is supreme, which means that it is the ultimate reference for any law of the land, right? So it contains the highest law of the country, source of legislation in the country, allocates power to the federal and state levels. And always remember, for a country like Malaysia, and I'm sure if you can reflect to your own countries as well, is many of you come from countries with similar setup or similar um, uh, organizations, which means that there is a central federal government that governs certain things, or they are empowered to decide on certain things, but there are also certain powers that are allocated to the state government, or in the context of some other countries, you may use the term provincial governments or regional governments, right? So all of that is part of how you run a country, because to run a big country with only one central government can be very difficult. So you need to also have your state level organization that has certain authorities and autonomy to do certain things. So to outline that, to differentiate between the powers of the federal government and the state government, we have what is referred to in the Malaysian Constitution, the federal list and the state list. So the federal list would cover the jurisdiction and areas on which the federal government is the ultimate authority. But when it comes to the state list, it will list down the areas on which the state government have power to decide on their own. Okay, but we have also common legislation, joint lists. So certain areas are governed or decided upon together, right? So we'll come to that point later on. But always, main thing to remember, federal constitution is supreme, okay? All right, so these are the main features of the Malaysian constitution, right? So as you can see over here, let's look into the points clockwise from the top. Malaysia is a federation. So what is a federation? As we have mentioned this before, a federation means it is a country that consists of a few units that are bound, that are united together, or they are part together of one federation. So these units can be referred to in different terms or nomenclature. Over here in Malaysia, we refer to them as states. So there are officially 14 states in the Federation of Malaysia, including the Federal Territory. The Federal Territories are considered to be a state on their own. Right, so there are 14 of them, right? So um, any one of you can just share in the chat room, in your country, how many provinces or states do you have? Well, just for us to share maybe some new information. Uh, those of you from Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Zimbabwe, in your country, I'm sure it's more or less the same. Federation, you have the federal government, but how many states do you have, and how many? So these are the state governments that you run. Right. Malaysia, a slightly unique aspect. 29. Where is this? Nuclear from where? India. All right. So that explains, right? 29 is a lot, but India obviously is a big country, isn't it? All right. So in India also, I'm sure the state governments, they have their own authorities when it comes to certain things. Bangladesh, there is eight. All right. That's good to know, right? Uh, yeah, 29, that's a lot, right? So when you have like the federal government meeting, all the head of state or the chief of states come to the meeting, it's a big meeting with 29 representatives. Right, so I thought in Malaysia maybe it's already too much, right, or too many, 14, but India is 29, right? So that's double. All right, but again, one has to understand India is a huge country. Right? What's your population in India now? It's more than 1 billion, isn't it? Zimbabwe, 10 provinces. All right. Tanzania, 26. That's a lot. Yeah, Tanzania is a huge country also. Yeah, Tanzania is West Africa, isn't it, Zara? East Africa, right? Sorry. All right. Yeah, the only African country that I've been to was Sudan. So that was about, yeah, that was in 2007, right? Definitely Africa is a country that I wish to travel, or a continent that I wish to travel more in the future, inshallah. Right, so Malaysia is 14, so always remember that. So we are a constitutional monarchy. Why? Because we still have Malay rulers, or the sultans that we refer to over here in Malaysia. So they still maintain a certain position within our government hierarchy. So the way to understand always how the Malaysian constitutional monarchy works, it is basically a carbon copy of the British system. So you know that the British system, in the British government, you have the Queen of England. I believe everyone should know that, right? The Queen of England is the head of state of the United Kingdom, but she does not run the country, which means that she does not like make policy decision making activities. She does not take part in that. So she is the head of state, but the head of government, the person who really runs or lead the country when it comes to administration, is the prime minister. So that's exactly how it is over here in Malaysia. And the only difference is over here in Malaysia, out of the 14 states that we have, 9 of them they have Malay rulers, sultans. So these 9 Malay rulers, they take turn to become every 5 years to become the king of the Federation of Malaysia. So in the UK, you don't have that. So there's only one Queen of England. There is no Queen of Newcastle or king of Liverpool or Manchester. No, right? So it's only one queen of England. So over here in Malaysia, some of these states they have their own kings. So they take turn every 5 years to become the king of Malaysia. Okay, so the constitutional monarchy in a way was the result of the Renaissance period in which there was a greater uh, uh, movement. There was movement for a greater participation of the civil society when it comes to governing the country. So as a result of that, there was a slight uprising, I think that you can say, in many countries in Europe where they had monarchy, traditional monarchy in the past, or absolute monarchy in the past, so the people wanted to have more power. So as a result of that, to their credit, I would say, when you look into how this event happened in the history of Western Europe during the period of Renaissance back in the 17th, 16th century. So you find that the monarchies in Europe, they were open-minded enough to accept the fact that they cannot govern the way they are forever. That means that they have absolute power for everything. So it needs to be, power needs to be dispersed, need to be given or shared with the people. So that is the legacy that we over here in Malaysia and many of you also countries which are part of the Commonwealth or modern nation states that we have today, we have in a way enjoyed that because I think all of you also, even countries in Africa, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, I'm sure at some point in the past in your history you had kings, right, that run the country, that rule the country as absolute monarchies. So you don't have that now, right? Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, that can be debated definitely. But on the good side, definitely is the democratic principles that we have in the sense that there is greater participation for a greater amount of people within the population. Not to say that everyone has a good say or has an effective say when it comes to how the country is governed. I'm sure all of you can point out to the realities of your own countries in Malaysia as well. We still have the bourgeoisie or the elite community, right? The noble families and so on that are very much more, not to say privileged specifically, but they are definitely favored more. Whether it's psychological or others, it's there. They are favored more when it comes to the ruling positions within the government. So, but at least there is greater dispersion or distribution of power that we have. Right? So constitutional monarchy is something that we inherit from that particular period in Western European history, and I think in many ways it was a good thing. Malaysia is practicing parliamentary democracy. So that basically means we have elections, right? So it's just that we need to know how is the Malaysian parliament is organized. Generally, in any parliamentary setting, you have the lower house, the upper house. So here in Malaysia, we have that also, and we'll come to that specific point later on. Islam is the official religion of the federation. So this is a point that we discussed in the last class during the discussion when they drafted the Constitution of Malaysia. This was discussed and debated, uh, and as a point that I mentioned in the past, also one person that perhaps you can credit for this particular aspect of the law or the Constitution that it was finally inserted into the constitution, the final draft of the constitution. The person that you can credit this for was the member of the Reed Commission, a judge or senior judge from Pakistan, Justice Abdul Hamid. He argued that for a country like Malaysia, where the population majority are Muslims, you need to acknowledge that in one way or the other officially within the constitution. So his argument was that you need to acknowledge that the Malay language and the Islamic religion needs to be there, something prominent, an official status of a higher status compared to other language and religion within the country. So that was basically agreed upon. Of course, in return, the Malay local population accepted the fact that we have to integrate, we have to accept the Chinese and Indian people who have been here for many years, and they very much are loyal and patriotic and willing to really work towards building this nation. So in accepting that, right, so the Chinese and the Indian community accepted the fact that we have to acknowledge also that the Malays Muslim community uh, allow that everything to be shared in the country, but we acknowledge their position as the majority community in the society. So Islam is the official religion. So the implication of that or the significance of that will be something that we will discuss briefly in this topic, but much more when we come to the last topic on Islam and the federation. Supremacy of the constitution and the rule of law, right? So basically, this particular argument or this particular point argues that you cannot go against the constitution, right? So if you want to implement any new rules, right, new policies in the country, if it is argued that it is against the spirit of the constitution, that it can be declared null and void, or it can be or it would be abolished automatically. So you would have from time to time state governments wanting to introduce certain new laws uh, that to them or according to their interpretation is within their authority. But when it is challenged by some parties um, as being unconstitutional with regards to the federal constitution, then if that argument is brought to the court of law and it is decided on that particular point of view, then the law, if it was introduced in the state government before, has to be abolished or it will be abolished automatically. So you do have that. We'll come to some examples of issues like this that we have had arguments or disagreements between state and federal government. That happens mostly when you have a situation where the state government and federal government, they are governed by different political parties or political coalitions. So as a result of that, they are not necessarily in sync or they are not necessarily in tandem when it comes to what they want uh, or what they feel is good when it comes to moving forward for their state and for the country. So when you have a situation like that, um, um, if it cannot be resolved or compromised in any way, then it has to be brought to the attention of the courts, and the court will have to decide. Right, doctrine of the separation of power, in which the judiciary, legislative, and executive has each its freedom to carry out its different functions with no conflict of interest. So this would be a topic that we'll cover more in government after this topic. But basically, again, I think those of you, I think most of you, I'm sure, have studied this when you study either history or civic studies during your high school years. In most of the governments, modern nation states that we have today, we have these branches of government: the executive, judiciary, and legislative. The executive runs the country; they are the administrators. The the legislative, they are lawmaking. They are the lawmaking institution, so they make the law, right? So why is it necessary that you have a legislative body? Because you always have situations from time to time, new things emerges, new challenges, new situations. So you need the law of the country to always evolve or be improved in order to cover these new issues. Primary easy example would be the current situation that we have now, COVID-19, so global pandemic. So when you do, for example, things such as the stimulus by the government to give it to the people, moratorium that we have over here in Malaysia, that we don't need to pay banks our monthly installments for the last 6 months. Laws with regards to working from home, for example. So when you have to when you have these things, these are new challenges that emerges because of the new or current situation that we are in. So the legislative body needs to remain active in order to make these laws to ensure that the government can be run smoothly, systematically, despite all these new challenges. So that's the reason why the legislative is always important. Of course, certain policies of any country requires the law or the legal body or the legislative body to also ratify or to provide the seal of approval. A common example would be when it comes to the annual budget, right? So in most countries, I would say the annual budget of the country, it is drafted and designed by the executive body, yes, by the finance ministry, treasury department, and so on, but it must be brought and tabled to the parliament, because the parliament is empowered to either approve or not approve the budget. So why you want to do that is because you want that balance of power, separation. You provide separation of power to provide that balance of power. So none of these institutions are too powerful that they are able to run the country according to their own whims and fancies, according to their own desires. Right? So you don't want to have a situation where abuse of power or conflict of interest can be a problem. Okay, so legislative is about making laws or amending laws. What is the role of the judiciary? Judiciary is to interpret the law, right? So when you have disputes, then it is the role of the judiciary to judge, provide uh, judgment, right, on which interpretation is correct, right? So if you've been following U.S. politics, right, a recent case, other than the circus around the presidential election with Trump and so on, is that I think it was 2 weeks ago, a Supreme Court judge, Ruth, no, I always forgot her last name, Bidensburg, right? She passed away. So Supreme Court judges are the highest, or the Supreme Court is the highest judicial body in the US. Over here in Malaysia, it is the federal court, right? We call it the federal court. So the Supreme Court in America, it is the highest body. So as a result of that, right, you now have different parties within the American political system. They want to ensure that that vacancy is filled up with someone that they can work with as far as ideological constitutional interpretation or ideology is, right? So the current government today now, the Senate is controlled by the Republican Party, so they have now tried to nominate and want to approve someone to come in to replace uh, the judge who just passed away almost immediately. So the hearing for the approval or appointment of this new Supreme Judge has actually started yesterday. So you can find how, when it comes to things like this, it's also part of the balance of power, right? The administration wants to have some level of influence with the judiciary, but the judiciary also needs to remain independent. So we'll come again to some of these issues later on. Validity and transparency of the judiciary with exclusive powers. So the judiciary needs to be transparent in the sense that they need to be very much free from um, any perception, in fact, not just simply actions, but any perception of conflict of interest or abuse of power. So, any one of you who perhaps have parents or relatives in your family who are judges, you can ask them. Being a judge in any country can be a very lonely job, because if you really want to live your life and serve as a judge with integrity and utmost professionalism, right? The saying is that judges can only be friends with other judges, not with anyone else, right? Because if you were to be friends with lawyers, right, too close to lawyers, or too close to certain powerful groups in politics or in government, the fear is you would not be transparent, you would not be fair in terms of the you handle those court cases, because you might be tempted to side or to be biased when it comes to your interpretation and your decisions. So that is an important point to remember, right? Again, we'll come to some more points later on about this. Now, the other main features are issues with regards to national language, citizenship, special rights of the Malays and native tribes of Sabah and Sarawak. Malaysian constitution contains 15 sections, 183 clauses or articles, and 15 schedules, right? So we don't need to remember those numbers. Don't worry. But yeah, let's now come to some of the, okay, last point over there. I think this is important also. The Malaysian constitution is not set and rigid. It can be amended through the process of parliament. Now, this is an important point. Yes, the constitution should not be something that is set on stone, which means that it cannot be changed at all. It is, at the end of the day, despite whatever we said just now, it is supreme. But then still, from one point of view, one has to accept that this is not like the Bible or the Quran, right? But where on which that we believe that it is something revealed or from divine sources. The Constitution, at the end of the day, is still a man-made document, right? So that means that if it has to be changed for improvements, and it can be changed, and it has to be, it must have certain areas or certain aspect of the Constitution that allows it to be changed. If the Constitution is set in such a way that is stated over there that this particular law is bound is effective from now on or from this year and forever and cannot be changed, then that can actually be challenged to be unconstitutional because it is not in the spirit of the Constitution being the set of law for us to look into when it comes to maintaining social order. Certain things may change, so one has to understand that. But at the same time, right, constitution cannot be also too fragile. What I mean by that is it is so easy for you to amend, right? Because you don't want to make it too easy for you to amend, so that you don't want any new government or prime minister that comes in, he will just simply do or abolish laws or introduce new laws according to his own interests. So you don't want that also. So finding that balance is not that easy. You want to make it right fluid enough or enough flexible enough that it can be amended to make it better, but at the same time you don't want to make it too fragile or too fluid to the point that it becomes weak, that it becomes something that can be easily manipulated by people in power. Amendments are needed, because no country can go without change, right? Right. Challenges is globalization or global pandemic, for example, or maybe other things. That who knows what's going to happen in the future. All right, so the constitutional monarchy, these are a few points for us to do to understand what is the role of the Yang di-Pertuan Agong. Now remember this, right? Although we are not giving any quizzes that are specific on these issues, but just for you to remember and know, the word for king in this country is not king, right? We use the word Agong, or the full name or the full term is Yang di-Pertuan Agong. Yang di-Pertuan basically is something similar to the English term Your Highness or Your Highness. So Agong is the term that is used for the king of the federation. For the Malay rulers in the states, most of them use the word Sultan, right? But when it comes to the king of the federation, we don't use the word Sultan. We use the word Agong, right? So those of you who are from Indonesia, you would know what the Agong means. Agong basically is a word in the Malay language that means it's grand, but of a high grand level. So we use it with a capital A Agong, so it becomes a proper noun, right? So it refers to the king of the Federation of Malaysia, right? So across different references that we will see later on, they use this particular uh, acronym YDPA. So YDPA refers to the Agong, right? Or the full meaning is Yang di-Pertuan Agong. Excuse me. All right, so as mentioned just now, the YDPA is elected by rotation from the 9 rulers that we have in the 9 Malay states. There are a few states that do not have Malay rulers, and they are Malacca. Just for information, Malacca, Penang, Sabah, and Sarawak. Right. Why Malacca has no sultan? Right. So, as you know, Malacca was the empire back in the past during the 16th and 15th century. So, when the Portuguese conquered Malacca, the Sultan of Malacca had to evacuate. So he went on to and he had to in a way evacuate, sought refuge in different areas. So the Sultan of Malacca from the time of the conquest of the Portuguese, from the conquest of Malacca from the Portuguese or by the Portuguese, he passed away somewhere in Sumatra. Uh, can't remember exactly the name of the town, but it's somewhere in Palembang, Sumatra. But his family or his descendants went on to establish Malay states in other parts of the Peninsula Malaya. So one example is the Sultanate of Johor. It has some reference to the family of the Sultan of Malacca, Sultan of Perak, Sultan of Pahang, Sultan of uh, I think these are the only ones. And Perak, Pahang, and Johor, right? So these royal families or the sultans that we have now for these states, they they have one way or the other, their family roots can be traced back to the Sultanate of Malacca, right? But Malacca itself never re-established their own sultan because it was taken over by one Western colonial power after the other, the Portuguese and then the Dutch and then the British. So the Malacca Sultanate was never restored. So in a way also it cannot be restored because there's no more Malacca Sultanate that exists today because they have all branched out to the different states. Theoretically, maybe you can say can, right? Maybe one of the siblings or family members of the Sultanate of Perak or Johor maybe can send one of their sons or family member to become the Sultan of Malacca. But people think that it's not necessary anymore. If it's not there, then why not? Why create more? We have already nine, so nine is probably enough, maybe more than enough. Right? Sorry, this is recorded. Right. The Conference of Rulers comprised of the nine Malay rulers, so they will be the one that will be voting for who becomes the next YDPA or the Agong or the King of the Federation of Malaysia. Right, so they do this every 5 years. So our current Agong started his term last year. So that's 2000, the year 2019. So he will finish his term in 2024. So he is from the state of Pahang in the East Coast. So after he finished his term 2024, he will return back to become the Sultan of Pahang. So someone else will be voted in to become the King of Malaysia. So that's how it works. So these are some of the general functions of the Agong: appointment and dismissal of cabinet members, supreme commander of the armed forces, appointment of judges, appointment of cabinet ministers, right? So true, right? When you see the functions of the Agong over here, it sounds to be very important. But always remember, just like in the UK, the monarchy, or in the case of Malaysia, the Agong, or in Britain, the Queen of England, they don't decide on anything on their own. It is all based on the advice of the Prime Minister, or generally speaking, the advice of the cabinet. So the Agong or the King, right, honestly speaking, is more like a rubber stamp process, right? But theoretically, if the Agong or even the Queen of England for that matter, if they want to, in any case, the advice given by the cabinet or the prime minister, they very much disagree and they refuse to approve, they can. But that would start a rather dangerous precedent. So in the case of the Queen of England, uh, I believe she has never done that. I'm sure that she has been a Queen of England since 1954 or something around that. So she has been a Queen of England for about 60, 70 years. I'm sure in that period, uh, there must be some members in the cabinet or even prime ministers themselves, individuals that she did not like personally. But she cannot exercise her power and say, I don't want you or any of your appointees to become members of the cabinet or the prime minister. She cannot do that because by precedent, right, she's supposed to approve. Right, the cabinet knows best. The prime minister is understood to know better when it comes to how to run the country. So the Queen of England simply would approve. But of course, privately, she may voice her concern. So over here in Malaysia, more or less that's the same thing, uh, except for one or two uh, incident that has happened in the past. One quite recently in February this year, where the Agong or the King exercised his own power to refuse, right, certain recommendations made by the government, right. So that that happens uh, occasionally, very rarely, but can happen. So has happened over here in Malaysia. So we'll maybe look into some of these examples later on. All right, so this is the Federalist, right? No, sorry. Yeah, this is both the Federalist and also the uh, yeah, this is basically the Federalist. Sorry. Yeah, you can see box that is labeled number 3 over there, right? So number 1 is just the information that we have covered just now. Separation of powers between federal and state government. Uh, the federal government's power, number 2, right, referring to box number 2 or label number 2 over there. The federal government's power is mentioned in the Federalist. The federal constitution contains 183 articles and is divided into 15 sections. So the important matters in the Federalist are as listed over there: foreign affairs, defense, internal security, federal citizenship, finance, trade, commerce and industry, communication, transport, education, medicine and health, labor and social safety, and censorship, right? We do have actually a censorship board in the federal government. Um, you may think it's a fun job to do. Imagine that, right? Your job when you are a member of the censorship body is to watch movies and TV content every day. And then you will decide or recommend what parts of the movie or what parts of the dialogue should be censored, either blipped out or either deleted or cut out entirely, or maybe you blipped or you silent it, right? So that is the role of the censorship board. But yeah, as I said just now, you may think it's a fun job, but I know of someone, a family friend, who served in the censorship board for about 10 years, and she said, in the first 1 or 2 years it was fun. After that, it was really, really depressing because you have to go through so many things, and then later on you discuss and debate, and you provide your recommendation. Finally, it's not your decision also whether or not your recommendation will be enforced. It will be decided by the Minister of Communication in the government. So it's not. It may be you think it's something fun. Maybe I like to think also it's a fun thing to do, but yeah, perhaps to do it more than a couple of years can be a big chore. Right? Can be a big burden. Now, the things that you can see over here, the matters that are listed on the federal list, I think when you reflect on the points there, it makes perfect sense, isn't it? Why the federal government needs to be in charge. For example, foreign affairs. So this is about how we design and strategize our relations with other countries in the world, within the region, right? Overall, when it comes to our membership and participation in various international organizations. So it makes sense that this is governed or decided upon one central authority, and that is the Foreign Affairs Minister or the Foreign Affairs Ministry in the federal government. Imagine if that particular power, when it comes to establishing foreign affairs or foreign relations with other countries, is given to the states. So different states will have different relations with different countries. Some wants to be friendly with this country, some of them refuse. So there's no consistency then. So you need to have the federal government taking charge of this. Okay, defense also, right? Uh, it makes definitely perfect sense to have the federal government in charge of the defense of the country, because if you have all the states, they have their own defense authority or defense body, they have their own army. You wonder, you would worry, isn't it, at some point maybe some of the states, because they have their own military capabilities, they may wage war against other states, so wage war against the federal government. So you want to have defense being centralized, right? So it's something that when you look into that, you can see the reason why it's like that, right? So education maybe is something which is maybe slightly different with some countries. I know some of you come from countries where education policies are not centralized. It is governed very much under the authority of the state government. But over here in Malaysia, we do have a federal level education ministry. We have an education minister. So he will decide on common policy when it comes to the national education curriculum and policies. However, state governments do have certain level of control when it comes to the running of their own schools of the schools that are part of their or within their territories. But it's limited. Right? You can run maybe certain programs on your own, right? Additional programs or supporting policies to support the students that you have in your states based on their unique situations. But when it comes to syllabus, right, it should follow the national federal education policy. Right? For example, over here in Malaysia, the high school examination, the final high school examination is called the SPM. If you have the chance later on, or some of you may have already, when you talk to your Malaysian students or local students over here, right, how they came here, where did they come from? So as many of them would say that they come here after taking SPM. So SPM is Sijil Pelajaran Malaysia, and it will be in Malay. English simply means the Malaysia Education Certificate or Malaysian Certificate of Education. So that refers to high school education. Not the level of diploma, but it's considered to be certificate level, enough for you to go for tertiary education after that. So the SPM is a centralized national examination, right? So the syllabus comes from the national curriculum. And when you take SPM also, you must pass two subjects. One is history and the other one is Malay language. You don't pass these two subjects or any of these two subjects, you will be considered to have failed the entire examination. You may score like all A's for your other subjects like chemistry, physics, biology, but if you get like F for your Malay language or F for history, you are considered to have failed the SPM and you have to retake everything. Oh, sorry, you have to retake those two subjects, right? Not everything. But you can't go to university, right? So we do have some students who fail these two subjects or either of it, so they can't start their college studies yet. So they have to retake the subjects that they have failed, either Bahasa Melayu, or Malay language, or history before and wait for the result, and only then they can start their tertiary education. So these policies are governed, sorry, by the federal government. Uh, whether it's good or not, whether you want to have more decentralization approach to how we govern country, that is a matter of debate, right? If any one of you were to study more on political science or policy studies in the future, you will come to that issue, right? The 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 debate between, right, how much power and how less power you want to give, right, between the federal government and the state government. The the America is slightly unique in the sense that the federal government, in fact, is not that powerful. State government has a lot of authority that they can decide on their own, right? And you can see in a way the mess or the problem with that in terms of the mess that it has created when you see how the different states in America react to or are currently handling the COVID-19 pandemic. Some states they are more relaxed, some states are more strict. So because there's no federal authority when it comes to things like this, so that is a problem, right? When it comes to uniformity and consistency. Okay. All right. All right. So let's look into a few examples. Oh, no, okay. No, this is the state constitution. What are the matters that are in under the control of the state constitution? So read from here. Again, I need to uh, take some water. Please, any one of you, I'm just trying to cover things quickly, but if any one of you wants to stop me or ask me any follow-up, any questions for me to clarify further, please at any point just use the chat box or you can start me and speak. No worries. All right, the state government, these are the authority areas that they have power for. One is to, the first one over there is a bit vague. Each state in Malaysia has its own rights, power, and responsibilities in terms of the following. All these rights are guaranteed. Oh, sorry, yeah. So these are point number 1, 2, 3, and 4 are general information. The important matters when it comes to state authority are listed in the section number 5 over there. So all these rights are guaranteed by the federal constitution. The state constitution cannot contradict the federal constitution. The state government's power is mentioned in the state list in the federal constitution, and the important matters in the state list are as follows: Islamic law, land, agricultural land and forestry, local government and services, state public works, and water. So again, over here, when you look into that, you may think that the state government is very limited in terms of its authority. But even when you look at all these 5 points listed over there on the section labeled 5 over here, that's actually a lot, right? Land and local government, especially. That means what? That means all the public facilities and services in the state must be governed by the state government. So that would include things such as the cleaning services, sanitation, uh, uh, utilities like water, right? So that will be something that the local government or state government needs to handle. Water has been an issue before because there was a time where the federal government privatized water services in the state of Selangor and Kuala Lumpur. So as a result of that, it created a bit of a tension between the state government and the federal government because for many years also between the state and between the Selangor state government. Selangor is the state where we are, where we belong to. Uh, EOWKDU in UG, Shah Alam. Shah Alam is the capital city of Selangor. So the state of Selangor, the Selangor government uh, disputed the level of control that the federal government have when it comes to water services. So as a result of that, there was actually a very high profile court case that eventually was judged in that actually has not been officially resolved even also until today, even though outside of court there has been a settlement already, but in terms of the Supreme Court or the federal court over here in Malaysia making their final judgment on the separation of authority between federal and state government when it comes to water services, that has not been officially judged or decided yet. But other things, land, agricultural land, I think that makes sense because state governments would know better the how to utilize the land that they have within their territories. One particular point that is a bit unique also, as you can see, the top one over there is Islamic law. Now, over here in this country, yes, we are governed mostly by the federal constitution, and the federal constitution is based on the British civil law. So it is, in a way, not necessarily based, definitely not based on Sharia law. But we do have, and this is also credit to the British, right? Islamic law introduced, or it's part of how we govern our state government. Because if you, I may have maybe mentioned this, but probably not in so much detail. When the British governed all the different states that we have in the Federation of Malaya, they took control of administrative duties, taxation, land ownership, and things like that. But there's one area where the Sultan was still free to govern as they like. So this would refer to is one of it is Islamic law. The other one is with regards to Malay culture or cultural issues for the Malay people. So because of that, the legacy from that, right, from that particular era in history under the British, results into different states having their own Sharia law. So when we became independent in 1957, the federal government felt that they could not just simply abolish the existing Sharia law you already have in different states and replace that with federal Sharia law. They felt that it wasn't suitable within the spirit of the Constitution of Malaysia, and at the same time also they felt that that would take away uh, some level of autonomy and authority on the part of the state government, especially the powers of the king, because the king or sultan of any state is considered to be the de facto leader of the Muslim community or the entire population, in fact. So because of that, you don't. They felt that, or the people who drafted the Malaysian constitution did not feel that it was nice for them to just simply abolish that and say now we should have a federal Sharia law, uniform, consistent across all states. We don't have that, right? So as a result of that, there are some rather um, unique things that you can find about how Sharia law is being implemented over here in this country. First of all, we don't have Sharia law to the level of penal code. Penal code refers to physical punishment, so we don't have the kind of punishment that you can see in some Islamic republics or truly countries that are based on Islamic constitution, like Saudi Arabia, like Iran, where you have still the death penalty. It is carried out through a certain way or punishment for things like adultery, flogging, right? Uh, Using the the cane, sorry, caning, basically caning for as part of as a method of punishment. We don't have that over here in Malaysia, right? So not to the level of penal code. What is more prominent when it comes to Islamic law is when it comes to family related laws. So that includes when it comes to inheritance, when it comes to land ownership to a certain extent, and also, and more importantly, when it comes to marriage laws over here in this country, different states for Muslims, right? Different states, there's different law, right? So you may think that's a small thing, but it can actually result, it has resulted into some amusing cases. For example, I'm just mentioning as an example, right? So women, please do not feel that as if I'm trying to have any other agenda behind this. I don't even have a wife now, right? So I've been a single father for almost 10 years now. But when it comes to Islamic law over here in this country, with regards to polygamy, polygamy means what? Having more than one wife, which is allowed for Muslim men. Muslim men can have to, not must have, right? Can have up until four wives at any one time, right? So in Malaysia, when it comes to polygamy, different states have different policies. So, for example, in some states, it's quite easy, right? The husband can marry for a second, third, or fourth time without the consent of the first wife. Some states require the consent, but a written consent is enough, which means that uh, the Sharia court judge just needs to see like a signed paper by the first wife, indicating her approval, her agreement that the husband marries the second, third, or fourth time, or taking a second, third, or fourth wife. But in some states, they make it even more strict. So, in order for the first, for the husband to take a second wife, for example, right, the Sharia court judge must listen to a oral testimony, right, on oral approval given by the first wife, right. So you can imagine how husbands, when they want to get married, over this is actually implemented here in the state of Selangor. So you can imagine how husbands in Selangor, right? If they want to get married a second time, you really have to ask for their first wife or their wife to really like cooperate, right? To come with them, right? Go to see the Sharia court judge. But yeah, again, this is one of the things that I think those of you who are from Muslim countries, you don't find this to be something unique or anything peculiar, but I understand there are those who feel that, why should I share my husband, or why is this even possible in this current area? So you may imagine, for example, so that no wife would ever want to allow a husband to marry second, third, or fourth time. But in actual fact, within the Muslim population, there are some people who are very much traditional. I would say when it comes to things like this, they are more conservative, traditional. So as a result of that, they are actually happy to actually allow their husband to marry a second or third time. They consider it to be, some of them consider that in fact to be something that is noble, right? In many ways, and something that that it's good for them to do, right? But then of course, it depends on how things are over here in Malaysia. Cases like this, why you want to require the wife to consent is because you don't want to have a situation where the husband marries second, third, or fourth time, and then after that neglects the family or the wife, right? The first wife, right? So you want to have a situation where only those who are capable, both physically and materially, financially, only them are allowed to marry second, third, or fourth wife. I know some of you come from Muslim countries where that's not even a requirement, right? Any man can marry second or third, fourth wife, not necessarily just those who are financially capable. Right. So these are the things that we have in this country that is quite unique. Right. So yeah, maybe last point on that. I know I sometimes when I talk too much about this, female students find it to be uncomfortable. So I'll end this, but just one last point about this. So because you have the Islamic law on something like polygamy, it's different from one state to the other. So you would find some people exploiting that for their own benefit. How? Right? You can't get married second time in Selangor because it's too difficult. You go to another state. You marry in another state, right? Where the law is a bit more easier or more flexible. So that is perhaps things that which is not so good on the current situation that we have now. So by right, I think when it comes to certain things like Islamic law on marriage, should be standardized, right? You should have like a federal level authority, but we don't have that yet because state governments, in a way, also they like to protect their own autonomy on how they do things. Right? So they understand. They would argue that we understand better our own needs, our own people. So we don't want to in a way let go of our authority to the federal government. Right? So that is one of the issues that you have governing a country. It's not necessarily that easy. Now, these are common lists. So this refers to the areas in which both the federal and the state government, they have combined authority. So this refers to social welfare, scholarship, national parks, drainage and irrigation, town and village planning, culture and sports, laws for the individual, election for the state legislative assembly, shipping, charities, and trusts. So, of course, this depends a lot on specific aspect of it. Social welfare, for example, we do have a federal level social welfare department, but within the state governments also they have their own social welfare authorities as well. So because this is part of a common list, so you would expect both the federal level Department of Social Welfare and the Social Welfare Authority in the state to work together when it comes to charting policies and programs within their jurisdiction. So obviously that may not necessarily be something easy to do because the federal government may have a certain point of view and the state government may have theirs. So, but that's part of the challenge when it comes to governing. You need to somehow work together with different people, finding a consensus, and then, of course, implement that. And you need to have also some organizational structure to it because if everyone else right down there in the hierarchy or in the organization are fighting, if there's no solution, then the person of the authority above that needs to make the decision. So that works for, I think that applies for any organization, even clubs and societies also, right? As all of you maybe can reflect, right? Amongst members of your club and society, you have different views about different things, but finally, when it comes to making the final decision, it must be decided by someone, and normally that refers to the person on top. Right, the state list for Sabah and Sarawak has some additional provisions to it to reflect the unique uh, cultural setup or cultural uh, um, arrangements, the colorful society that you have in Sabah and Sarawak. So because they have lots of tribal communities, indigenous communities, so they have their own interests to protect. So as a result of that, the state list for Sabah and Sarawak includes also these items within the authority, and that refers to laws and customs of indigenous communities, ports and harbors, land survey. In Sabah and Sarawak, that applies also when it comes to railway and also boards and institutions that is very much under their authority. Right? Things such as land development, port authority, um, natural resources, national parks. Right? So all of that must be governed together. Now, those of you who have been in Malaysia, who are in Malaysia now, or maybe you have been in Malaysia before, sure you have some of you at least have noticed that our road signs they are divided or they are colored differently. Some are blue and some are green like this. Anybody knows what does that mean? Or do you think there's no meaning over here? It's just that we like the color blue and green, so we use that interchangeably. What do you think? Anyone? Why blue? Why green? All right, so let me just come straight to the answer. Now, the signs that you see in blue, that reflects the road that is under state. That's right, right. Kumaira, you are correct. So the blue is for state roads, so roads that are governed by the state governments or state authorities. So the maintenance and the construction of these roads were done under the budget or within the budget and also authority and management of the state government. But we do have over here in Malaysia certain roads that are governed by this federal government. So this would refer to normally the highways, the interstate highways. So interstate highways over here in Malaysia are mostly privatized. They are built by a consortium, private companies or private consortium, but the ownership of this consortium is always the federal government or the Minister of Finance Incorporated. So they are the majority shareholder, but you have also investment obviously from the private sector. So the reason for doing that is to ensure that the construction and also much more important, the maintenance and improvements of these highways are done by professionals within the field, and also it is done in an efficient way without the need to, if it's part of the federal government, sometimes can be very tedious when it comes to asking for budget. Huh? You need to present to the minister, and the minister have to present to the cabinet. If it's something of a certain more value than usual, you have to present also for approval in the parliament. So it takes time. So you want to have a bit more efficiency when it comes to certain things. So privatization in Malaysia started um, a lot in the 80s. This is something that those of you who study economics or the history of economics or political economy in the past, you know that at some 70s and the 80s, privatization of government departments or government authorities uh, or bodies. Uh, the movement for privatization was something very prominent that started in the 80s. So you can see that in the example of in America, in the UK, right? In America under Ronald Reagan, in the UK under Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, over here in Malaysia as well, our prime minister at that time, Mahathir Mohamad. So he was also someone who was very much into that. So privatization was the thing that we implemented a lot. So one thing that was started in the 80s was privatization of highway construction. Right. So when you see any green signboards like that, it means it is a highway, interstate highway. But we do have also within KL, within Kuala Lumpur, a few not interstate highway, we call it expressway. So expressway also is privatized. These are not going across different state, but these are just like expressway. These are new roads that are built to make to make your travel to certain destination faster. Hence the word express, right? Faster, expressway. So the not so good thing about these highways when they are privatized is what means that you have to pay toll, right? So those of you who have traveled around Malaysia, you would know this already, right? There are many places you have to stop, you have to pay a certain amount of money, and then you can go. So that to me is really something I find annoying, especially when it comes to the expressways, because you're traveling around the area, right? But you want to take this shortcut road, the new road that they built, I have to pay for that. So going long distance, I understand that. Right? It's okay for me to pay because I know the roads are very huge and long, and it needs maintenance to ensure safety and comfort. So that one I understand. But when it comes to expressways, that one I really feel that federal government was not wise in doing so, because you are really pandering to the different private companies who are just looking for profit. Because when you build those roads, right, you use a certain budget, yes, investment, but then your returns are very much guaranteed because you're taking money from the road users. But yeah, that's how things are over here in Malaysia. All right, how much time we have left? Okay. Uh, Okay, let's look into these 2 points before we end for today. Right. So now we are looking into the federal constitution about the definition of a Malay person. Now you may wonder, why do you need to define who is a Malay in the constitution? You need to define that. Why? Because a Malay person, a person who is defined a Malay in the by the Constitution of Malaysia, would have certain privileges, special privileges. So that is something that needs to be done, defining it. So how do you define a Malay person in this? According to the Constitution, a Malay person is someone who is a Muslim, habitually speaks Malay, and follow Malay customs. Over here in Malaysia, I have to understand that a Malay person is always a Muslim, right? Has to be that. That is how the Constitution defines it, right? Malay by itself refers to ethnicity. Right, those of you who are from Indonesia, you may know, right, those of you from Philippines, if there is any over here, you would know that there are Malay people by ethnicity and culture, but they are not Muslims in Indonesia or maybe even in Singapore. But over here in Malaysia, that cannot be the case. You must be a Muslim to be a Malay. So theoretically speaking, if you have someone who is Malay Muslim, born Malay Muslim family, and he or she wants to to convert out, right? Wants to renounce Islam and wants to embrace other religion other than Islam, that person will not be considered a Malay anymore, and that person will not qualify for any of the privileges that a Malay person enjoys according to the Constitution of Malaysia. So that is slightly unique. It's a very unique thing that we have over here in this country. That yes would have certain um, predicaments in terms of how you may actually have uh, disagreements about how things are interpreted. But yeah, that's how it is. Habitually speaks Malay, right? Yeah, sometimes I tend to uh, make jokes about this, because you say habitually speaks Malay. You know, whether it's a good thing or not, it's depends on where you stand or how you look at it. Like for me, I have 3 kids, and I mostly speak English with them. My youngest daughter, in fact, is someone who continues to get very high grades for English, but for his Bahasa Melayu or Malay language exam papers in school, she's quite bad. So sometimes I think that maybe my family, we don't satisfy this particular provision in the constitution that we habitually speak Malay. But then the thing is this, right? Who wants to check? Do you think the police or the authorities over here in this country will go house to house, Malay families, and check you speak Malay in the house or not, right? So if you don't speak Malay in the house, then you cannot become a Malay person anymore. But as long as you habitually speaks Malay, means that you speak it as part of the habit. Doesn't mean that it is a language that you speak 70% or 80% of the time in your life. No one is going to measure that. Likewise, also the final point over here about following Malay customs. What is Malay customs? Malay custom is something also very broad. If you want to refer to Malay uh, traditional attire, very few of us wear Malay attire anymore. Uh, during, especially when it comes to going to work. The only time that perhaps I would wear, maybe you've seen also me sometimes on Fridays, I would wear my baju Melayu or the Malay traditional dress, but not the full gear. If it's a full gear, it would include also with a headgear and everything else, but I don't wear that. Uh, so Malay customs over here also is something which is a bit more general stated over here, not something so specific. So there are also a few other things specifically about the Malay person with regards to their roots in Singapore. Right? You can read this further on your own later on. The other point is, so in relation to that is why it's important to define a Malay person, because a Malay person is considered to be a specific category within the constitution, and that is referring to the term that you see over here called Bumi Putra. Okay, so understand this still, right? So very, that's one. the color is green. Okay, yeah, yeah. This term, Bhumi Putra, right? So very important term when you understand the context of race relations over here in this country. Bhumiputras, so those who are categorized under Bhumiputras or included under the category Bhumiputra in the constitution, they qualify for certain, they are given, they are acknowledged to be of a certain special position according to Article 153 in the constitution, and as a result of that, they deserve or they would get certain privileges as indicated in this particular slide. So who are the Bhumiputras? The main group of people who are part of Bumiputras are the Malays. So for you to be a Malay, you must be a Muslim. If you're not a Muslim, you're not a Malay, you're not a Bumiputra anymore. So you don't get these privileges anymore. So that's the implication why defining the Malay person is important. But it's not only the Malay person. Bumiputra also includes the Orang Asli. So this will refer to the Aborigine community that we have across the country, and also the natives of Sabah and Sarawak. Now, the natives of Sabah and Sarawak, as stated over here, they are slightly unique because the natives of Sabah and Sarawak, the majority of them are not Muslims. The majority of the people or the natives in Sabah and Sarawak are in fact Christians. Some of them can be Muslims. Some of them can also be those who are still loyal or still adhering to their traditional religions in the past. So, but that is only for Sabah and Sarawak. But when it comes to Peninsular Malaya, only the Malays and the Aborigine community. So what are the privileges that you get? Right, you get special quotas for public service positions, federal scholarships, trade and business licenses, and tertiary education enrollment. So those of you who have been in Malaysia for quite some time, right, you know that KDU or UOW KDU, we are a private institution. What is the who are the majority of the students that we have in KDU, local students? They are mostly Chinese. Why is that so? The reason is public universities, they have a certain quota system where most of the students must be Bumiputras. So Chinese students, Indian students, when it comes to applying to public university, applying to join or study in public universities, they have to apply, but the places for them are limited. So because of that, they have to study in private institutions like UOW, KDU. Fair or not, that is something else. That will be something that we can discuss further, and something that we can discuss further in one of the tutorials and maybe exam question later on. Trade and business and licenses, what is the example of that? Like KDU is one example of it, right? Any private organization or company over here in Malaysia must have a certain number of Bumiputra workers or employees. So that is something, if you don't have that, then the company may actually lose its license. So, but except for maybe a few specific industries where finding that balance, diversity can be difficult. But for most other organizations, you need to have that. Federal scholarship also, right? There are bigger quota for Bumiputra students. For non-Bumiputra, slightly less. Public service positions also, when it comes to joining the civil service. Now, why this is done, right? So this actually started since our independence in 57. So again, this reflects something that we talked about in the last class, that the so-called social contract, the gentleman's agreement, so to speak, between the leaders of the different communities during the negotiation for independence. I recall back, right, the major issue that the Malay community had when it comes to the British proposal for Malayan Union in the past was that it was making it too easy for the Chinese and Indian community to become full citizen of the country. But at the same time, right, they realize eventually, the Malay people realize eventually that we need them to stay, right? Because and we should allow them to stay also because many of them, they have made Malaya, right? Malaya at that time, the name, their home, right? For many generations now, so it's not fair for us to ask them to leave. So as part of that, so the compromise is the Malays allowed or in a way agreed, consented the Malays, the Chinese and Indians to become full citizens of this country. But in return, these non-Bumiputra groups, or the Malay, the Chinese and Indians specifically, they need to also accept that we need to give something in return to the Malay people, and that is by acknowledging that they have a certain special position and they get certain special privileges. Is that a good thing or not? Well, by all means, if you have any questions about that, put it over here. You think what is fair or not fair? Okay, does not seem fair to me, right? I have no issues with that. Definitely, I am a Malay person myself. I have enjoyed these benefits. I've studied under a federal government scholarship in the past. Uh, so I've seen how things are being implemented. Definitely, I feel that it's not fair in terms of how it is implemented. But I do understand the reason why it was done in the first place before. But here is where uh, racial politics comes into place. I feel certain things now can be made more level because the country is now over 60 years. This was a legacy from the past. But things are not easy to change. Just common sense, basically, right? Once you have given certain privileges to certain groups of people, asking them to let it go, it's not easy, isn't it? Right. So that is the basic problem over here in Malaysia today when it comes to race relations. We will come to this. I won't avoid this question. Definitely, I very much welcome any criticism about this particular policy from your point of view. And as I said right from the start, when it comes to issues like this, even though sensitive uh, in many ways, for us to discuss in public. But in this class, by all means, right, you have any points of view, if you want to say that you feel it's bad, then say so, and we'll try to understand that. Yes, you have a question. Go ahead, Yuko.
Sir, I wanted to ask what you told about the Bhumiputras. Whoever born in Malaysia is a Bhumiputra, or
Yeah.
only the Malays or the Orang Asli.
No, it's stated over here. Right? The Bumiputras are Malay and natives of Sabah and Sarawak. So Malays will refer to Malay Muslims. Orang Asli, yes, that Orang Asli refers to the Aborigine community. We have it all over the country. Small numbers, but we have it still. And the natives of Sabah and Sarawak. But the natives of Sabah and Sarawak are not necessarily Muslims. That's the difference.
So,
Yeah.
so is it they have some special powers?
Not powers, but they have certain privileges that are given to them. Certain things are given to them more. Listed over here:
Okay.
public service positions, scholarships, tertiary
Oh,
education
okay, okay,
enrollment, and so on. Okay, so it's not that
okay. Thank you,
they
sir.
have it's not that they have special powers, but so one of the questions that I've given in the assignment for the term paper and presentation, right, if you may recall, is can a non-Muslim become prime minister of Malaysia? So as far as the constitution is concerned, there's nothing to stop that. You can become the prime minister of Malaysia even though you are not a Muslim, even though you are not a Malay. But it's just that when you know that politics is being controlled or dominated by the Malay people, it's just difficult to imagine at any point that a non-Muslim can become or non-Malay can become the prime minister, isn't it? Because you need the support from the people. So the majority of the people over here in Malaysia are still Malay, and it's a growing majority also. So it's that's how things are. So on one hand, yes, you can look into the theory side from the constitution point of view, but you have to understand also from the practical side on the ground. So here's where the debate comes in. Okay. All right, so we'll talk more about this. Now, this Friday is not a live class, so it would be a recorded lesson. Do I have? Uh, I don't think we are supposed to have. We have tutorial this week, but let me check again.